I'm the father of a 6-year-old girl who was only 2.5 when these events took place, and I'm sure any parents would agree that what happened is nothing short of horrific. My wife and daughter and I had just relocated as I'd been promoted and assigned to help manage one of my company's offices in another city. We managed to find a large but very affordable house in this relatively upscale neighborhood. Even more than the actual size of the house, our plot of land was huge. It was in a wooded and hilly area, and most of the houses in the neighborhood, including ours, were on the top of this one hill. Our properties backed up, or down, I should say, to the forest. The moving in process itself was pretty uneventful. We met several of our neighbors, including our 2 next-door neighbors, and they all seemed really nice. Our neighbors on one side were an elderly couple, and the people who lived on the other side were a husband and wife who had 2 young boys. My daughter, who I'll call Amelia, was at least a few years younger than they were, so they never ended up playing together, but she still had a blast exploring the house. As we found out during the move, there was a system of trails nearby, and though I'm not sure it officially connected up to our neighborhood, you could reach it easily enough from walking down our hill. After we'd reach our limit for unpacking for the day, Amelia and I would walk outside and down the hill, exploring progressively further. The forest wasn't super dense and didn't have a lot of underbrush, so you could easily see and walk down the side of the hill. Eventually we ran into a sign with a map on it, which showed the trailhead was about a mile or 2 from our neighborhood. About 2 weeks after we moved in was the first really good rainstorm. I always loved watching storms, and our house was an ideal location. When I got home from work around 5:30, Amelia and my wife were finishing up dinner, and Amelia was excited about the storm. I guess she's a lot like me in that regard. My wife, who I'll call Rachel, told me how excited Amelia had been all day waiting for me to get home. We went into the family room, which led to the deck on the back of our house, and opened the blinds all the way. The wind had already picked up, and the trees were moving rather violently. Amelia wanted to watch the storm from the deck, which I was on board with, but Rachel said no. So instead we compromised and opened one of the sliding glass doors so we could hear and smell the storm approaching. Eventually it started raining, and we went ahead and shut the doors, but continued to watch the storm. Now here is where things start to get disturbing. At some point, maybe around 6 or so, Rachel and I went to check something on her laptop in another room, and when we came back, we noticed Amelia pressed right up against the window. Rachel and I laughed, and she made a remark about how Amelia really liked the view. But then Amelia turned around and asked us who that was. Rachel asked Amelia who she was referring to, and Amelia pointed outside. Rachel and I came over to where she was standing, but couldn't see anything. Rachel asked Amelia who she was talking about, and Amelia said there was someone walking in our backyard. I looked at Rachel and could tell we were both concerned, but a second later I realized Amelia might have just seen our reflections in the glass. With the storm, it was almost pitch black outside, but we had lights on in the other rooms which were reflecting off the windows and door to the patio. Rachel tried pressing Amelia for more details, but she wasn't able to provide any. As a precaution, I turned on the outside lights before getting one of our umbrellas and flashlights and walking around the backyard. I was reasonably sure Amelia had just seen our reflections, but walking around looking for a possible intruder, I was a bit on edge. I didn't see anyone though, and after 5 minutes came back inside. I told Rachel I couldn't find anything, and by this point she and Amelia were already getting engrossed in reading a book. I let things drop, and just made sure that all the doors and windows were locked. Fast forward to 2 weeks later. It was a Saturday afternoon, and Amelia and I were exploring the trails at the bottom of the hill. Earlier in the day we'd gone to see the Paw Patrol movie as a family and done a couple other things in town, and now Rachel was at home working on her laptop. The sky was overcast, and based on the weather app, it was going to start raining in a few hours. While we were walking, Amelia randomly made a comment about how maybe that person would visit us again. That caught me completely off guard, and at first I didn't realize what she was referring to. So I asked her what she meant, and what Amelia said next sent shivers down my spine. Amelia asked me if the man in the costume was going to come to our house during the storm. I pressed Amelia for more details, and apparently the other night Amelia had seen someone in a bunny-type costume walk up the hill. She said they stopped right before they got to our deck. I asked her why she didn't tell us this before, but Amelia couldn't give any reason. Note that this story does not take place during either Easter or Halloween, and from what I remember, the Paw Patrol movie did not involve any bunny characters. We started walking back to our house, but before going inside, I asked Amelia to show me where the person had been standing. My blood ran cold when she very deliberately walked to one specific location about 10 feet beyond our deck and stood still. Based on where she was standing, the light reflecting off the patio doors would not have made a reflection there. We went inside, and when I mentioned these revelations to Rachel, she started freaking out. Rachel grilled Amelia for more details, but she didn't say much more. Apparently Amelia had noticed the man standing there when Rachel and I were in the other room, and then walked over to the window to get a better look. Then, according to Amelia, that person just walked away down the hill without doing or saying anything. From Amelia's description, it wasn't clear exactly what the man was wearing, but since she couldn't describe his face, we thought he might have been wearing a mask. Now, however disturbing this conversation was, I still had some doubt. Kids can have active imaginations after all, and when Amelia supposedly saw this person, it was really dark outside. Also, nothing unusual had happened before or since that night. Regardless, when the rain started coming down, I made sure we were all inside and checked all the doors and windows. The living room did feel somewhat exposed, given that it was separated from the deck by full-height glass windows and a sliding glass door, so I lowered the blinds all the way and pulled the drapes closed. Our house had 2 stories, with a master bedroom and bathroom and a couple other rooms on the second floor. The bathroom had windows that looked out over the backyard, and I planned to peek through the blinds periodically the rest of the afternoon. Honestly, I wasn't expecting to see anything, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't now have a sense of paranoia. Rachel gave Amelia a bath, then after that they did some activities including reading and drawing. I was mostly on my laptop in the office room upstairs, answering a few emails and working on this one project. Around dinner time I checked in with Rachel and we decided to order delivery from this one pizza place. In a half-joking, half-concerned way, she asked me if I'd seen anything outside. I told her I hadn't, but reassured her I'd keep checking. It was raining fairly heavily now, with thunder every minute or so, and it was getting harder to see outside. I decided to turn on the outside lights and went upstairs to check from the bathroom window. The lights did help me see past the end of our deck, and after scanning the edge of our yard, I went back to where I was working in the other room. Eventually the doorbell rang, and I heard Amelia start shouting that the pizza was here. Rachel and Amelia went to answer the door, and I started winding things down on my laptop. Rachel called up to me about the pizza, and I told her I'd be there in 2 minutes. I finally shut the lid, but before walking downstairs, I decided to check the bathroom window one last time. I froze when I saw that person standing in our backyard. He was in almost the same spot Amelia had shown me, and I knew that he wasn't the delivery guy. I just stood there, feeling my heart pounding in my chest, with my face pressed up against the blinds and staring through this narrow gap. I did my best to study the man, and in the time I watched him, he was standing completely still, hands at his sides, facing our deck. I couldn't tell if he was looking at anything in particular. The man was wearing a suit, and I was like 90% sure he was supposed to be a bunny. Hands trembling, I raised my phone and did the best I could to angle the camera through the gap. After a few tries, I managed to get a picture that was mostly in focus. Trying to keep my composure, I walked quickly down the stairs and found Amelia and Rachel. They were laughing and had started to eat the pizza, but when Rachel saw my face, she was immediately concerned. I did my best to explain calmly that I had just seen the person outside by our deck, in the hopes that they wouldn't start panicking. Rachel was on the verge of tears, and I told her to lock Amelia and herself in one of the bathrooms while she called 911. Rachel started shaking her head no, as in, don't go outside and confront whoever that was. But I felt I had to, and knew he could be long gone by the time the police came. Amelia hadn't caught on to what was happening, and I figured that was for the best. I went to grab one of my hunting rifles and shook as I loaded it. To be clear, I'd gone hunting before, but I only shot birds, not people. I stood in front of the door to the deck and took a deep breath before pulling back the drapes and unlocking the door. I did my best to slide the door out aggressively at the same time I called out, "Who's there?" There was no answer, only the sound of the rain hitting the deck and the trees. I scanned the surroundings, but that person was gone. I stepped outside, immediately getting soaked, then shut and locked the door behind me. I yelled for whoever was on my property to F off and never come back. Then I walked to the edge of our deck and turned on the flashlight and shined it down the hill. I couldn't see anyone. Then it hit me that the man could be hiding under our deck. I summoned up the courage to walk to the edge and down the steps, keeping my gun drawn, but he wasn't down there. I scanned my surroundings again and still saw nothing. The rest of the story played out like you might expect. The cops arrived 10 minutes later, and of course they didn't find him in or anywhere around our house. Rachel and I contacted our neighbors, who were shocked to learn what had just happened. Everyone told us they had no idea who that person was. The police also told us they'd patrol the area, including sending a squad car through our neighborhood and also checking through the trails, but as far as I know, that person was never identified. From that point on, Amelia wasn't allowed to play in the backyard unless she stayed within arm's reach of either my wife or I, and after this happened, we went in our yard a lot less frequently. Rachel and I had a home security system installed that next week, and we were debating about whether to stay in that house or move when I got the news that I was being transferred. Apparently that project I and some of my coworkers had worked on had been a huge success, and upper management wanted us to help implement changes in another one of the branches. In total, we only lived in that house for about 6 months, and it was really unfortunate since aside from what happened, my wife and daughter and I loved the view in the surrounding area. We moved into a house with a more normal-sized yard in a suburban area, which already had fencing. Our life since then has been uneventful, and I'm still happily working at that same company while Amelia's in school and Rachel works virtually. Of course, I can't help but wonder who that guy was and what his intentions were. Was he planning to rob us? Or kidnap Amelia? Or was he just some whack job in a bunny suit? But another question is, why us? Why did he apparently wait for a thunderstorm? I don't think we'll ever know, but I just pray to God that he didn't somehow figure out where we were moving. Right after graduating college, I moved into this small one-story house on the other side of the street from a neighborhood park. It has a rather pretty view, especially for watching thunderstorms, which is something I love to do ever since I was a kid. There's just something about the darkened sky and soft sounds of rain, and even the lightning and thunder that I find so mesmerizing. I use the front room in my house as an office where I work virtually for most of the day, and whenever it rains, I open the blinds and just sit there in my chair, looking out at the park. There's an elementary school nearby, so the park is frequently very busy in the evenings and on weekends when the weather is nice. On this one Friday afternoon though, the storm clouds had been building and it was already very dark and starting to drizzle by the time school got out. There had actually been a severe storm warning and it was supposed to start hailing at some point. I had just gotten out of a painfully long meeting and still had several hours of work ahead of me. Luckily, the rest of what I had to do mostly involved spreadsheets and filling out reviews of some of my virtual team members. Therefore, I could do that asynchronously and take a break first. I usually kept my blinds shut, both for my own privacy and also because I didn't want it to seem like I was trying to watch kids on the playground. Anyway, I walked over and opened them up now, and was greeted by a sight of the rain coming down slightly harder and the park completely empty. Or at least, I thought it was empty. After several seconds of standing at my window and taking in the natural beauty, I realized there was someone standing on the play equipment. I almost didn't notice them, likely because they were standing completely still. It looked like an adult, too tall to be a kid but not super tall, and they were wearing a blue hoodie pulled down over their face and sweatpants. In the park there were two main playgrounds, one for, I guess, littler kids, and one for older, middle school ones. This person was just standing in the middle of the bridge in the playground for older kids, looking down to where I couldn't see their face, but still oriented in my direction. Immediately I got creeped out, and figured that whoever that was wasn't anyone's parent. I thought for a moment and then closed the blinds. I wished I hadn't opened them in the first place. I went back to my seat and stared at the screen, not sure what I wanted to do. Obviously it was harder to concentrate with some creepy person standing in the middle of a playground facing my window. I decided to wait 5 minutes and then peek through the blinds as discreetly as possible. My house didn't have any other windows on that side, so my only other option would have been to either open the front door or garage door, or go out the back door and look around the corner. The usually soothing sounds of rain on the roof and windows now sounded more ominous, and after 5 minutes I got up and peeked through one of the gaps near the bottom of the blinds. My heart sank when I saw that person still standing there. It seemed like they hadn't moved. There was still no one else in the park. I looked hard, but couldn't make out any more of their features. It was raining heavier now, and the wind was blowing in the trees. I contemplated my options, and finally told myself that if he was still there 5 more minutes from now, I'd call the police and report him. Maybe that seems excessive, but this was right by an elementary school after all, and you never know what kind of sick people are out in the world. Another 5 minutes passed, and the rain was coming down even harder. I crept back up to the blinds, and my heart sank again as I saw that that man was still there. I debated for a moment, then returned to my seat and called the police non-emergency number. A lady picked up after like the 5th ring, and I explained how there was a suspicious person who had been standing completely motionless in the middle of the park for at least 10 minutes. The person I spoke to seemed concerned as well, and told me she'd send someone over to check on him. Then she advised that I stay in my house and keep my doors locked, and call back if anything else happened. Then I hung up, and that was it. I thought about whether it would be best to stay away from the window or watch to see if anything happened. And maybe it was my curiosity, but I walked back over and peeked through the blinds another time. He was right outside my window. I fell backwards onto the floor, heart in my stomach. The man was literally 5 feet away from my window, standing between 2 of the bushes in my front yard. And when I had looked through the blinds, he turned and looked down at me. In that brief moment when our eyes met, I saw his completely blank expression. That was frankly terrifying. I ran out of the front room and into the adjacent bathroom, then locked the door and dialed 911. Out of breath, I explained how I had just been on the phone with someone else about a creepy man standing alone in the park, but now he was right outside my house, and he knew that I saw him. There was a small window with frosted glass located at the top of the tub and shower area, and the rain and possibly hail striking it made it somewhat difficult to communicate. Then, in a moment of sheer terror, I heard banging coming from somewhere on my house. It didn't sound like the man was hitting the windows, but instead like he was hitting the brick walls with a baseball bat. I can't convey in words the emotions I felt when the bangs became louder. Finally, it sounded like they were right outside the bathroom. Then, in one final, gut-wrenching moment, the man actually pressed his disgusting face against the frosted glass of the window. He pressed it so hard that I could almost make out his facial features through the glass. I screamed like a little girl while the 911 operator tried her best to keep me calm. I didn't want to leave the bathroom, since the window was almost surely too small for him to fit through even if he did manage to smash it out. 2 seconds later the man pulled away. Instinctively I waited for the banging to start again. But it didn't. I was just left there, barricaded in the bathroom, with the sounds of the storm. The cops arrived within 5 minutes, and when I heard them announce their presence at my front door, it was like 1,000 pounds off my chest. They asked if I was alright, and I told them I was. Then the 2 officers conducted a thorough search, both inside and outside my house, but the man was nowhere to be found. In fact, there wasn't really anything. Whatever he used to hit the side of my house apparently didn't damage any of the bricks, and the cops couldn't find any signs that he tried to break into any of the doors or windows. Another thing to mention is that the window in the bathroom was like 9 feet above the ground on the outside of the house. The guy must have stood on something to push his face against the window, but I have no idea what that was. After they were done searching my house, the cops told me to wait inside with the doors locked while they searched the park. I actually watched through my blinds as they conducted their search, terrified that I would hear another bang from somewhere on my house, but I didn't. Eventually they returned empty-handed and completely soaked, but let me know that they'd patrol the area for the rest of the evening and to let them know if anything else suspicious happened. I thanked them and went back inside and locked the door. Needless to say, I was extremely on edge after that point, and the sounds of the rain, hail, and thunder were not helping. I'd periodically check the windows, getting a shot of adrenaline each time, but thank God that man never showed up. Somehow I managed to get back to work at some point and even finished up everything I needed to do. Honestly, it helped take my mind off things. I didn't have any family nearby that I could stay with, and though I considered leaving for the night and getting a hotel room, with the storm I decided to stay put. Getting to sleep alone in my bed was a struggle, but with how tired I was, I eventually fell asleep. I woke up around 7 the next day and the storm had subsided. Seeing the sunshine was actually reassuring and helped me work up the nerve to walk outside and inspect my house. Nothing looked out of place. This happened 2 years ago now, and though I've been paranoid off and on, that man has never come back. I now have a long-term girlfriend and she recently moved in, and we're relatively engaged in the community, I'd always feel awkward mentioning this story to people, partly because many of the people we'd interact with could have children that visit that park. But perhaps more unsettling is the thought that I just imagined the whole thing. I mean, I'd never had a hallucination before, at least not that I can remember, but there was no physical evidence of that man's encounter after he left. Still, I think it had to have happened, as the emotions I felt in that moment seem way too real to be part of my imagination. And though I've largely put this experience behind me now, whenever a storm rolls in and I'm working in that front room with the blinds closed, I can't shake the feeling that the man is right on the other side. I got a bachelor's in science before becoming a teacher, and for the most part my experiences in college were fairly typical. I was never too into the party scene, and I did take a bit of a gap year to visit Europe with some friends. There were some things I don't care to remember, but overall I enjoyed my time in college. However, there was one experience that was downright terrifying. It was my junior year, and I was taking a class in entomology, which is the study of insects. I know that might turn some people off, but I found it interesting, and the class was an easy A. There were also only like 12 people in our class, and it was very informal. Partway through the semester, the building that we'd been meeting in started undergoing renovations, and so we'd have class in random places around campus. The location was usually announced online 1 or 2 days before our next class, and the other people in the class and I would joke about where we'd go to next. Near the end of the semester, for the last test before the final, our professor reserved one of the lecture halls in what I think was the business center. It was this big multi-level concrete building with both an indoor and outdoor section, and I'd only been there once or twice before. The class started at 6 and the sky was overcast like it was about to rain, so by the time I walked over there, it was already starting to get dark. The first floor of the building had concrete walkways that were open to the outside and had several large lecture halls with doors leading into them. The layout was a big square where you could walk around the edges, and it also had corridors running between the lecture halls that met in the center. The ground around the building had a slope to it, with the walkways actually being a few feet below ground level. There were yellow fluorescent lights overhead, as well as 2 staircases and 1 group of escalators leading up to the 2nd and 3rd floor. The hallways on those floors were encased by tinted glass windows which looked out over the nearby campus buildings. This place looked like it was built in the 70s and had a very unique style. I got there around 5:50, but when I tried to open the doors to the lecture hall, they were locked. I double-checked the room number I'd saved in my phone, and I seemed to be at the right spot. The room was on the 1st floor, so I was outside, and I heard the rain starting to come down. I knocked, and after getting no answer, I decided to walk around. Being slightly interested in photography and having taken a class in it last semester, I took out my phone and snapped a few pictures of the big concrete structure. It had been hot and muggy that day, but now that the rain was here, it was cooling down, and I enjoyed being outside. Eventually I walked all the way around the lecture halls on the 1st floor and returned to that same door. It was still locked, and no one answered after I knocked again. It was now like 5:59, and I opened up Blackboard on my phone, confirming I was at the right room. I texted Julia, another girl in the class, and besides waiting for her to respond, there wasn't that much to do. Partly out of curiosity, and on the off chance that people went to another room for some reason, I took the escalator up to the 2nd floor. I should also mention that the building was so far entirely deserted. The escalator led out into this triangular-shaped concrete walkway area with vending machines against the wall, and I took a few more pictures. Then I walked through the doors into the interior area that held the classrooms, and was greeted by the air conditioning and a certain smell. The inside hallways had these big benches with cushions and these carpeted areas at each corner. I walked around, taking a picture or two, but then tensed up as I realized someone was sitting on one of the benches. He looked like another college kid, and was rather good looking, but he was playing some type of video game on his laptop. I'm not sure if he noticed me, but I kept walking by. Again, I made one full loop, and by this time it was 6:10. I checked my phone, but Julia hadn't gotten back to me. I stepped back outside, being greeted with the sounds of heavy rain, and took the escalator back to the 1st level. I tried knocking one more time, but when no one answered, I decided it was time to leave. However, the rain was now pretty intense, and I thought it might start hailing. Therefore, I decided to go back upstairs and work on homework while waiting for the storm to subside. I went up and entered the building, and out of curiosity checked to see if the guy was still there on his laptop. he wasn't, and since it didn't appear any classes were being held, I figured he left. I set my backpack down on that same table and took out my notebook and the packet of stats homework. The sound of the rain hitting the glass, now accompanied by the occasional lightning and thunder, was actually rather soothing. I managed to concentrate and work through several problems. Then I heard a sound like someone's shoe squeaking. That startled me, as I had been sure I was alone. I checked my phone and saw it was now 6:42. Julie had never gotten back to me, and I assumed that class had just been cancelled. Something like this had happened once before, and the next time our professor had apologized, saying he'd forgotten to click the button to post the announcement. I looked in the direction I thought the sound had come from, expecting someone to walk out from around the corner, but they didn't. I guess I didn't have a reason to be suspicious, but I hadn't heard any of the doors open, and I was also ready to take a break from stats homework. So I put my stuff back in my backpack and started walking in that direction. When I looked around the corner, I saw nothing. I checked the weather app and saw the storm should be over in an hour or so, and I decided to stick it out and try to get my homework done. I didn't immediately sit down again though, instead making another loop around the building. I didn't find who or what made that sound, so I wrote it off as something to do with the air conditioning. I sat down on another one of the benches and took my stuff back out. Maybe just 5 minutes later, I heard the sound again. It's hard to describe, but it sounded deliberate. I looked up and checked both hallways coming from that corner, but didn't see anything. I almost called out instinctively, "Who's there?" but didn't. This time I was more freaked out, and decided to leave even though it was still raining heavily. I put my notebook and packet back into my backpack and turned down the hallway, getting my umbrella ready. I now had the distinct sensation of being watched, and made my way quietly to the doors. But to my horror, they were locked. My blood ran cold, and then in the back of my mind I remembered something about the doors in this building being automatically locked after 6:30 p.m. There was an emergency exit, but I didn't necessarily want to trigger the alarm. Still, I had to do something. I started checking my contacts for the number for campus security, but as I did that, I heard the sound again. I looked up and screamed. There, around one of the corners, was the face of some middle-aged man with long, wiry hair. It definitely wasn't the guy who was inside the building with me earlier, and he didn't look friendly. He immediately ducked behind the corner. I ran in the opposite direction to the emergency exit and slammed through the door. To my surprise, the alarm didn't go off. Maybe it wasn't an emergency exit after all. I didn't care though. I ran for my life down the stairs and then out through the door back outside. I quickly opened my umbrella, then started running back across campus. By the time I got to my dorm room, I was soaked. My roommate wasn't there, and after changing clothes, I decided to call campus security and report the man. 30 minutes later, 2 campus security guards showed up and asked me a few questions. I didn't have much else to tell them other than what I mentioned on the phone. They assured me they'd check the building out and that I was safe in my dorm room. When my roommate got back an hour later and I told her what happened, she was very sympathetic. Later that night when I was checking emails, I realized I had missed one from our teacher. It wasn't in my spam folder, but it had an overly generic subject heading like class, and I guess I didn't realize it was from him. In it, he told us class was cancelled and we take the test during the next class 2 days from now. I guess for some reason he didn't want to post this as an announcement. Anyway, the next class wasn't to be held in that same building, and that's all I cared about. 2 days later, I received a follow-up phone call from campus security, but as I suspected, they hadn't caught whoever that was. They did advise that I take basic safety precautions, including walking with someone else or a group and letting people know where I'd be ahead of time. I thanked them, and that was the end of it. Besides my roommate, I never told anyone else what happened. I can't help but think about what happened sometimes, including how that guy managed to avoid being seen by me despite me doing loops in the hallways. I did consider the possibility that the person I saw was just a janitor, but based on the look he gave me, and the fact that he didn't appear to be cleaning anything, that seems a lot less likely. I also can't help but wonder what that guy would have done to me if he had caught me by surprise, or if I didn't make it to the exit in time.